Committee is really keen to understand how the UK supports innovators and what more we can do. And so to inform our work, we select an innovator to share their story before our main evidence session each week. And today's innovator is Damien O'Boyle from Healthyio. And I'm introducing him today because John Pierce, who chose him, unfortunately can't be here with us today. So Healthyio is a health technology company that uses the smartphone camera as a clinical grade diagnostic tool. Founded in 2013, it partners with health systems, insurers and governments worldwide, aiming to improve access to care, support earlier diagnosis and reduce healthcare costs. And I understand that your flagship product, Minuteful Kidney, is an at-home urine test that enables early detection and management of chronic kidney diseases. So, Damien O'Boyle, perhaps you could take us through your innovation journey.
Thank you for having me along, and thanks for the opportunity to speak today. So I'm Damien from Healthyio. We're a health technology company based in the UK, and we transform the smartphone camera into a medical-grade device. Our mission is to bring clinical level testing into people's homes using their smartphone, making prevention and early diagnosis more accessible, equitable and efficient. We have two key products in the NHS. So our wound assessment product, Minuteful for Wound, builds a 3D model and provides the NHS with objective digital measurements of wounds. It is currently used by 2,500 nurses across 17 NHS organisations, enabling prompt, proactive treatment, saving money and reducing the £8.3 million worth of burden of cost, but also preventing amputations. Our urine product, Minuteful Kidney, which is going to be handed out now, I'm here to talk to you about today. It's an at-home urine albumin to creatinine ratio test. It's the gold standard for detecting early signs of chronic kidney disease, CKD. It's delivered through a smartphone. CKD is a silent condition that affects 1 in 10 adults in this country. Most don't know they have it until it's too late. By that point, they're at risk of lengthy renal dialysis, transplants and heart attacks. These are treatments that cost the NHS at least £7 billion every year, according to Kidney Research UK. And these are lives that could have been saved through earlier identification. The problem at hand is not that the NHS lacks the know-how, it's that the uptake of testing is low. Access to testing is patchy and current models are burdensome for patients and for primary care staff. Traditional testing relies on an appointment, a trip to the surgery, a sample pot and a laboratory process. For too many people, up to 50%, particularly those in underserved communities, this model simply isn't working. The outcome is late diagnosis, higher health inequalities and mounting costs in different parts of the NHS. This is the gap that Minuteful Kidney fills. By enabling a patient to take a clinically validated test at home using only their smartphone and a test kit delivered quickly to their door, we break down barriers of access. The results of the test are instant, accurate and shared securely with a GP. It's not a gimmick, it's proven. We've now supported testing for over 300,000 people across 23 integrated care systems and 1,700 practices, with particularly high uptake among groups who rarely engage with traditional services. The service is rated 4.8 out of 5 by patients, and crucially, currently around 38% of those tested are identified as needing follow-up. A number that translates into thousands of people carrying a high risk that would otherwise have slipped through the net. The benefits are really clear. Patients receive earlier diagnosis, reassurance and better long-term health. Clinicians save time and can focus resources where they need to. The NHS avoids the enormous downstream cost of long-term dialysis and transplantation. And UK society benefits from reduced inequalities and a healthier, more productive population. Independent evaluation by Yorkshire Health Economic Consortium suggests that the national adoption of Minuteful Kidney could save the NHS over 660 million within 5 years, and that's a net figure. Our strategic approach has been evidence-led. Alongside NHS support, we've invested heavily in generating robust, peer-reviewed, real-world data, working closely with ICSs to prove that the product can operate at scale and with genuine outcomes. We've aligned carefully with the NHS long-term plan, Lord Darcy's recent review, and the life sciences sector plan, all of which call for exactly this kind of shift, from analogue to digital, from hospital to home, and from sickness to prevention. And it works. But let me be brutally candid. There are significant challenges in the UK operating environment. Even with a proven service, NHS adoption remains fragmented and slow. ICSs must each commission separately, leading to duplication, delays and patchy coverage. Procurement rules often prevent direct award, forcing local systems to re-evaluate technologies that are already nationally validated. And there is no clear national framework to take an innovation from proven and ready to consistently adopted everywhere. This is demoralising and costly for innovators, frustrating for our clinicians, and ultimately not in the best interest of patients or the taxpayer. Across the UK health system at the moment, we run the risk of incredible, successful health tech innovations developed and scaled in the UK, often supported by UK taxpayers' monies, leaving our market and going to others that are considered more favourable, rapid and sustainable. So what could government, industry and stakeholders do? I have 3 priorities. First, we need national adoption pathways for proven innovations, not endless pilots, but a clear route for digital diagnostics that have demonstrated safety, effectiveness and cost benefit to be rolled out across the NHS. We should not leave life-saving innovations to a postcode lottery. Second, we need procurement mechanisms that match the ambition, flexible tools that allow NHS bodies to commission high-value, high-impact technologies quickly and consistently without endless local duplication. The new Procurement Act gives us a real opportunity here, but it will require bold implementation. There are huge opportunities to better partner with health innovations. For example, take an equity stake or agree contracts that share the risks but also the rewards of success. Such approaches provide a sustainable base for innovation but could also benefit UK PLC when selling to the rest of the world. Finally, we need to ensure that as we adopt proven innovations, we also commit to decommissioning outdated and inefficient pathways and removing monopolised barriers to integration. Too often, new solutions are simply layered on top of existing models, creating duplication, additional cost and confusion for both clinicians and patients. Without retiring analogue fragmented processes and replacing them with streamlined digital-first pathways, the full benefits of innovation, better outcomes, efficiency and equity will not be realised. Decommissioning old models is essential if transformation is to be more than an aspiration. What we're talking about here today is not hypothetical. We already have the tools, we already have the data, we already have the patients benefiting. What we need now is the political will and system alignment to take what works well and scale it nationally quickly. If we can do that, we can not only save lives and save money, we will show the world that the NHS can lead in adopting digital, equitable and preventative care at population scale. This is an aim worth striving for and one that we can sell to the rest of the world as a UK growth legacy. Thank you for listening.
Very good. Very good. Thank you very much, Damien O'Boyle. That was fascinating. The Select Committee is very interested in the diffusion of new digital products and services, and as part of our Digital Centre of Government, we have been engaging with NHS sort of innovation leaders on this. You've put a very clear case of some of the challenges, and I think particularly the decommissioning of services is not something that we've looked at, in my understanding. So thank you very much for sharing your innovation, and I'm sure we'll find great use for this.
If you'd like to get in contact afterwards, you can test your kidneys at home.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Order. Order, and welcome to the Science, Innovation and Technology Select Committee's session. This is our first opportunity as a committee to hear from the Advanced Research and Innovation Agency, or ARIA, about its work in the first few years since it was founded. And I really want to welcome our witnesses, Ilan and Matt Clifford, and I'll ask you to introduce yourself in response to my first question. Well, in fact, my first question to Ilan. You are ARIA's first CEO, founding CEO. You're also now the outgoing CEO. You stated last year that you wanted the CEO job because of your belief in the power of science and technology to drive progress and serve society, a belief that really echoes with this committee and indeed with this government. So after 2 years, what are your biggest achievements in fulfilling that belief, and what might have been done differently?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having us here. Just by way of introduction, I'm a scientist turned entrepreneur. I've spent about 20 years working on translational innovation, largely in the climate and industrial space, but basically really focusing on how do we get cutting-edge science and research that is happening in incredible labs around the world to be translated into products and capabilities that can serve society. And to some extent, the chance to be here shaping ARIA with you all has been one of the greatest privileges of my life and career. I think to the question, it's actually been an interesting time to reflect on, so I think our appointments, Matt and mine, were just around a little bit over 3 years ago. Yeah. And I actually remember a combination of excitement and skepticism, frankly, when ARIA was created and when I took the job. And I think the skepticism, both from folks that I met here in the UK, but also former colleagues from DARPA, et cetera, were on a few fronts. One was, okay, it's great that a government wants to set up an organization inspired by DARPA, but is it really going to work out in the way they intend? Is it really going to be independent and flexible and nimble? And so that was a question. There was a question of talent. Would the organization be able to attract the right type of ambitious researchers and scientists to be part of the organization? Part of the model is this program directors and people at the center. And then there was a question of, is the UK, does it have a sufficient critical mass of not just research, but research of the right mindset to do transformational high-risk, high-reward work? And I think reflecting now, ARIA was a bit of a far-fetched idea, and it feels like now we've created a foundation with some really strong proof points on all of those fronts. So one, and this is thanks very much to the intentional design of ARIA from you all and your colleagues as policymakers, but also the incredible partnership we've had with DCIT and the government, it really has taken root as an agency that can be very bold and speculative in what it tries to fund, changing the conversation, being contrarian at times, but and with independence and flexibility, but with a real dedication to accountability to the taxpayer. And I think the culture and the team we've built is one of my great sources of pride. I think secondly, we have been able to attract incredible talent of the right type. Our first call for program directors was way oversubscribed. And the folks that came in as our first program directors have now shaped a set of opportunities, and this is probably the most important part for ARIA, really looking at the strengths of the UK, thinking about where are those, we think sometimes as a proxy for scale in terms of economic value. So where are those trillion-pound opportunities that maybe are not being appreciated or exploited well enough today in the system? And everything from new ways to think about curing neurological disorders to next-generation agriculture. I think both the organization has now become one that is being talked about globally as a great model, an example. And the spaces that we're in, I think the UK and ARIA is now sort of at the center of frontier conversations around what's possible. And then just lastly, we are starting to see a lot of in terms of mobilizing the critical mass in the ecosystem, we're here to amplify the incredible work, and we're starting to see across our programs everything from new communities forming to new technical capabilities, And then to really catalytic, new companies, new talent moving to the UK, becoming a center of massive talent. And I think all of that are the early signs that we were hoping to see. So thank you for the question, and look forward to talking about all the details of that.
Thank you very much, Ilan. And I would agree with you that the talent that you've been able to attract and the breadth and range of some of the programs that have been announced are very impressive. And I know we'll come to in more detail to expanding on that as part of the questions that the committee has. But just to stay with you for a moment, what prompted you to leave now?
Yeah. Well, I think, as you know, in terms of the design, ARIA, part of the design of ARIA is that there's a fair amount of the staff is term limited and is intended to turn over. Those are the technical program directors and the CEO. And I think the intention for that is the agency should always feel in some ways like a startup, should always be forced to test the assumptions that were made a few years ago in terms of what's happening now and recast based on the frontier of what's happening both in terms of the world and technology. And so I came into the agency really feeling like what a privilege to be able to shape a chapter of ARIA, and certainly a big responsibility to shape the first chapter. And in terms of what is the first chapter, really we thought about, what are the foundations to build? So a team, an organization, a set of operating principles, the interaction with government, that all has felt really great. Building the operational model, recruiting the first set of program directors, launching a first set of programs. We've now committed roughly £450 million into these ambitious, bold research programs. With the recruitment of the second group of program directors, we've had to sort of iterate a little bit on what we learned in the first group. And it now feels like we're moving into a different chapter where, and certainly with activation partners, we've done a lot to figure out how the future translation of these technologies will happen. And so with the first chapter closing, it feels like actually this is the very best time to position the agency for an incredible new leader for a second chapter, especially with a strong foundation to build off of, but also, runway in terms of visibility for funding with the spending review. And I think what we're seeing through the search for the new CEO, Matt can speak more of this, is that will prove right. I think we will be spoiled for choice in some ways, I hope.
We will.
Thank you. And one of the points you make about the resemblance between ARIA and startups is very well made, and I think in contrast to some of the research and innovation infrastructure we already have in the country. But one of the challenges of startups is succession planning. And you talked about the independence of ARIA, and that's been a theme which is much emphasized during the design of ARIA and in terms of ARIA's ability to get on and do things. Can you tell me where we are in, and perhaps this is best to you, Matt, Matt Clifford, can you tell me where we are in the search for Ilan's successor, and what succession planning you have to ensure that the strength of talent continues against as ARIA reinvents itself every 2 or 3 years?
Absolutely. Excited to do that. So first, thanks again for having us. I'm Matt Clifford, the chair of ARIA. My background is as an entrepreneur and startup investor. I spent the last 14 years building and scaling technology companies here in the UK and around the world. I've also had the opportunity to serve both this government and the previous one as an advisor on AI. So it would be untrue to say that when I realised that Ilan was leaving, that was a cause of celebration. Ilan's been an extraordinary leader for ARIA, and I think we, as a science and tech community, but really the country, should be really grateful to Ilan for what he's done. I think he and the team have laid the foundations of something really extraordinary. So we launched the search formally for Ilan's successor in July and closed applications in August. And of course, as you would expect, as you said, succession planning is not something you leave to chance. So we did a huge amount of pre-engagement with the people. And honestly, it's a relatively small number of people that are qualified to take on a role like this. I've done a lot of recruiting over the last 14 years. I would say without exaggeration, this is the strongest field of candidates I've ever had for a role, almost to the point where I'm starting to think, oh, good riddance, No, I'm joking. But we had 330 applicants for this role. We're still quite away from the end of the process. Obviously, it's a big decision for the organisation where we go. We would expect to be making an appointment towards the end of the year. There's lots of engagement to do with our different stakeholder communities. But the calibre of people that the agency is attracting is globally significant. We're talking about people that have led US ARPA-like agencies at the highest level. We're talking about some extraordinarily successful entrepreneurs in science. We're talking about some of the leading academics in the UK and the world, all interested in this role. And to sort of synthesize the reasons, because of course a big part of the process is understanding why they want to do it. I think what is really encouraging is that people see in ARIA no longer a blank slate because the foundations are there, but a platform on which some of the most exciting science and technology in the world can be built, and the sense that actually we have here a globally unique opportunity.
Thank you. Just to look specifically at what ARIA is and the similarities and differences between ARIA and the US's DARPA, which has a budget, I think, of $4 billion per year, whereas ARIA's is £1 billion over 5 years. Can you just briefly summarise what you see as the differences and similarities and why?
Sure, yeah, I can take that. Having been involved in setting up a DARPA-inspired agency in the US, DARPA-E, but also working closely with DARPA, I think what you've allowed us to do in the mandate is take inspiration from the most powerful parts of that model, but also recognize that it's not a copy and paste job. So I would say there have been a couple of things that have really allowed ARIA to present differently, and I think actually have a different probability moving forward and a high probability of being able to deliver the transformational outcomes that you set us up for. I think one is that ARIA, there was a lot of intention from Parliament. ARIA was not given a very narrow mandate in terms of a mission. Our mission broadly is to unlock science and technology breakthroughs that can benefit everyone. That's how we view it. A global ambition, but obviously a dedication to benefiting the future of the UK. And actually that broad mandate, combined with the positioning of ARIA in the UK, has been an incredible asset for us. What it's allowed us to do is attract, I would say, talent that feels like, what's the point of ARIA? It's finding opportunities that are highly consequential to the future, where relative to that importance, there's not enough activity going on. There's someone very talented out there saying, this is never going to happen in the existing system, so I need to step in, or we need to find a way to make it happen. And there, one example in our new set of program directors, one of the program directors who just moved with his family from Stanford is Nathan Wolfe, a virologist turned more generally translational biologist, who basically in applying said, I believe there is an opportunity to create a technology platform and industry as big and as important as genetic engineering, focused instead on the energetics, engineering the energetics of life as opposed to the information of life. A very bold and profound vision. And he said, I can't think of an agency that would allow me to shape that vision other than ARIA. And frankly, for many of the talent that we're attracting, they're saying, and actually for various reasons, the UK seems like the best place in the world to position for this, both because of the rich amount of science, but also geopolitically and otherwise. So I think that broad mission has been very valuable. And then frankly, I think the other valuable differentiation is that we are starting this fresh right now. And so we are doing our best to tailor ARIA. We don't have legacy sort of operating platforms and principles and strategies. DARPA was built in a world where the best research in the world happened within big companies. Today, we can build ARIA towards thinking about how do we sort of evolve with AI and have that be a part of the platform? How do we think about entrepreneurship at the heart of the impact model? And I think we're still in the early days of seeing how that's going to be a really important differentiator.
And I know you need to be diplomatic in response to this question, but is it true to say that the current US administration's approach to science and scientific research is creating opportunities for ARIA and science in this country?
My diplomatic answer will be, I actually think before the administration change in the US, we were seeing that ARIA, the mandate and the positioning, once we sort of announced it and it looked real to people, was feeling very attractive to global talent, and we continue to see that.
Thank you. Alison.
Hello, thank you. I want to sort of look at your risk appetite, your ethics, and how you measure failure and success. You've suffered some backlash on some of the geoengineering project, which eventually had to be brought down, and you have a neurotechnology one that's raised some questions as well. And of course, we need to worry about unintended consequences and risks of dual use. So I'm interested in how you determine the ethics, and you have the ESRC panel. What is the authority of that panel? How can has it got the authority to stop projects? How do you control it when it's out in partner organisations? And to reassure public and the scientific community about the transparency of these projects. So so what is the authority of the ESRC?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one we spent a lot of time, both at the organizational level and the board level, discussing. We also have a set of advisors on ethical, responsible deployment of technologies that we consult on these issues. I think first of all, it's worth recognizing that given the mandate, we're meant to be doing things that are bold and maybe under-researched. And sometimes that's because there is a bimodal sort of reaction to whether that's a good idea or a bad idea. Will it work? Will it not? And certainly one of the ethical considerations of any new frontier technology are important. For us, the way to address ethics and social responsibility really starts at the foundation of having made a decision that actually, even though we have exemptions from FOIA and otherwise at ARIA, that is not a mandate to operate in secret. And actually, the best way that we can surface what are the implications of technologies we're working on is to build in public. And so whenever a program director is shaping a program, as soon as there is a thesis, we say, for what we might do, we publish that, we solicit feedback. It's very easy, sort of on an online form. And we solicit feedback both on the technical aspects and the non-technical aspects. That's one. One of the things we require internally is that the program director in that discovery and then preparing for an internal approval request for the budget and the authority to launch that program is to engage with the social and ethical responsibility questions related to that program. Now, obviously, in every different field and every different program, there are differences, both in terms of the degree to which there might be unintended consequences or in the research itself, ethical implications, and also the degree to which the public is engaged in being concerned with those issues. And so there, what we have said is, as part of that review process, we look at the specifics of that case. You brought up our program on climate cooling. That was one where from the very beginning, it was clear that not only are there big ethical issues associated with this work, but this is a space with a ton of misinformation and disinformation. And so just as an example there, Mark, the program director, ended up both through engagement iterating quite a bit on what that program would look like, integrating a very significant sort of governance element to that program in terms of the requirements to anyone who would apply. Here's what's inbound, here's what's out of bounds. The governance and ethical questions related to climate cooling are still being formulated globally. And so there was a recognition that we can't assume there are answers to these things. So another thing that he did was, and we did, and actually this came through as part of that early feedback, was created an oversight committee for that program. A number of arm's length international experts. One of the things we built into that based on their advice and their willingness to participate was they'll have a lot of access.
They have the authority to go stop.
So they don't. So that's very important, which is what we don't want to do is have ARIA be a place where the decisions ultimately are made by committee, and then you reduce the ability to increase the variance that you are looking for in the research that's being funded. So for instance, in the case of Mark's oversight committee or that program's oversight committee, where we landed was They have access to all of the information about the projects. They can make requests and we'll provide them that information. They reviewed all of the proposals that we were recommending to fund, provided recommendations to me as the approver. And what we said was that committee has the ability at any time, without need for permission, to communicate publicly any concerns they have about what's happening in the program. And I think that puts a pretty good sort of set of trust. And then we have a board committee where really, again, the goal is not to cede decision-making to that committee, because that would be a hard responsibility. They would need to be conservative and go to sort of the lowest common denominator, but instead to make sure they are informed about the processes and the approach we've taken for each of the programs.
I hear your arguments. I mean, there is a thing in the ethics community, within the AI ethics community, that there should be a go, no-go decision-making point. But you've explained why you don't have that. So that's understandable. I'm going to move on because there's other questions. We could talk for hours, I know. But again, it's about stops, really, and about failures. And Kit mentioned quite rightly he felt that failures should be renamed discoveries, because I think there's real value on that. You can't commercialise failures necessarily, but sometimes you can. So at what point do you, or the project director who has control of this decision, determine that this project is going to be a failure? You said you don't mind if they fail, and I completely support that attitude. But at what point would you determine this is no longer going to be, carry on, and it's the failure? And then how do you learn from that failure going forward? Because there's some gold in there usually.
Yeah, maybe I'll give a quick answer to this. Actually, we had our new CTO join recently, Ant Ralstron. He was formerly the deputy at Microsoft Research Cambridge. And he said to me something interesting when he joined, which is, wow, I'm really blown away by the level of talent here, but what I'm more blown away, he probably didn't use the words blown away, sorry, the Americanism, but what more impresses me is the culture of really talented individuals who are willing to confront. They're constantly looking for what is the better adaptation of their ideas, as opposed to being married to theirs. And so I'd say that is built in, the discovery process when program directors are shaping programs. We've seen a number of pretty big pivots and changes there. In terms of managing the research, though, this is one of the unique elements. Each program director has chosen very deeply and intensely, spent hundreds of hours choosing the portfolio of projects that they're funding relative to the thesis. And then every quarter they're going to those teams and they are evaluating, do we think this project is still on track to contribute to the expected success and value of this program? Do we think they are performing at the level of intensity that we expect? And if not, they have a hard conversation with that team. We're just in the early stages of this, but I'll say one of the things we've celebrated is, Suraj, our first program director to launch a program, within 6 months said, these two projects that I funded, they actually aren't what we thought they were once we see it deeply. And we've now moved to shut down those projects in collaboration and conversation with them. And then other program directors, we have sort of a RAG, red, amber, green status of projects. And interestingly, what we're celebrating early on is, where are you turning things up red? Because it means we're learning and we can adapt. And so failure for us very much is learning.
And then with regards to success, and there's a few scientists in here who've got some research, and we all know, especially if you're doing something that's risky and radical, never been done before, and it's brand new, it can take a long time to get it going. And if you have a 3-year funding cycle, it could be that you're only just beginning to get the flaming apparatus to work after 3 years, let alone any results. So I'm a little bit concerned that your plan is to have these multi-decade projects that will expand whole new fields of research and science, but you've got 3-year funding pots. And there's nothing worse than you just getting going and the funding cut short, and you spend more time hunting around for new funding than you do the research. How are you helping the success on these difficult projects that might take time, and how are you funding them?
Yeah, I think that this is it's a great observation in the sense that, and this is one of the tensions in the agency. We have said that programs that we launch by default, maybe there will be exceptions, but by default we'll have 3 to 5 years terms to that program. And the idea is a program director has looked across the ecosystem, developed and formulated a thesis. What we've said is, because we're working at the frontier, 3 to 5 years later, it's probably likely that elements of that thesis have become stale because the world has changed in different ways. And so the idea, back to learning, is let us sprint, to use the metaphor, with a set of research teams to try and accomplish a goal in that time window. Not because we think we're going to solve the entire problem, but because we think that will allow us, based on the information right now, to take a very meaningful breakthrough step. And then we'll be able to evaluate. And so I think, and I'll maybe point to that, for the programs and the areas which we believe will provide the transformational impact that we're looking for, it likely won't be a single program that solves it. It will be a program, and then based on the learnings from that, there might be a follow-on program, and there might even be a third that moves it forward. And so I think the 3 to 5 years initial term is sort of that first big step.
I understand that.
I'm sorry, I may not have answered the question.
There is an opposite problem that we're actively seeking to avoid, which is that you get this dependency on a single funder. And so one thing we've always been extremely clear on is that ARIA should play a catalytic role, not a sole role in the funding of these programs. So because of the process that Ilan described about how these programs are developed, there's very deep engagement by the program director in the broader ecosystem, both of people doing the work but also funders. And so a big part of the culture of ARIA is to build these programs into ecosystems, to situate them in a network of interest. And so I think like the other sort of way I think about this challenge and how we resolve the tension, and as Ilan says, it is a tension, is that it's a really good discipline to say, if at the end of 3 years or 5 years, there's no one else that wants to pick this up, we haven't embedded it in an ecosystem enough that it's still dependent on ARIA, then that's a failure.
Right, and that's where I have a concern. And I'll stop now, Chair. Sorry, my apologies. That isn't reassuring me that this is any different from any other research environment that we all have suffered from in terms of these short-term projects and so on. So it's just a thought that I would make a comment on that.
No, sure, Tyler. I'd very briefly say, I think this is a lesson I've learned the hard way as a venture capitalist. That when you fund something, you're very naturally the next funder of it too, and that's sometimes good. But usually, if you're still the next funder of it 3 to 5 years later, then something actually is wrong.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alison. Adam.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Morning, both. Thank you for joining us. Ilan, you've spoken extensively about the first cohort of program directors, I think fairly with some pride. I was wondering, in your perspective, what are the most significant achievements that first cohort have made?
For me, it always goes back to fundamentally the mission, right? Are we able to surface these profound new opportunities for the future of the country? And I would say not only have we seen signs that we're able to surface them and get the UK and our work in sort of the epicenter of the global conversation around them, but we're starting to see catalytic signs of things happening in those spaces in the UK that just never would have happened otherwise, that could be very valuable. It's still early. And so, some of the examples, and apologies if folks have heard some of these before, but, Jacques, our program director, is a quantum physicist who turned his attention into neuroscience, basically had a hypothesis that, recognized that actually, if you look at the expected value, if it's actually true that we can modulate and intervene in the full range of neurological conditions, not through small molecule pharma, but through neurotechnology circuit engineering, the expected value of that, both in terms of impact and financially, is somewhere between 30 and 40% of global pharma. So it is a huge opportunity. The UK has all of the pieces of expertise that you need. And his view was the cutting edge science suggests that the next generation of neurotech may look different than what the world, Neuralink and others have done so far. And so his program on precision neurotech was the first ever to think about a precision metric of how you can access circuits. And what we found there, because the program was able to look at this differently and say, not only is this a new sort of challenge in terms of precision neurotech, but we're open to anyone who can move this idea forward, whether it's a brand new idea or a system. Some very new things came out of that. I think one that I like to talk about is there is a nonprofit startup, which is one of the world's leading groups actually based in the UK, looking at ultrasound for modulation of neural circuits. It's very nice because it's non-invasive relative to existing approaches. Through our call and teaming list, they found, they had never met before, they found a neurosurgeon in an NHS trust that actually was looking at the hardest cases of depression, which are untreatable through any pharma approaches. And we're now funding that collaboration to be the world's first clinical trial at the NHS of this. At the same time, you have something very early stage. There is, so that's, I think, one. And we can talk about a similar story, and I wish we had time to, for, in programmable plants. We now, in terms of the intersection of agriculture and the leading edge of synthetic biology, even this term programmable plants is being cited around the world. And we have synthetic biologists that never thought they would work on plants here in the UK now working as part of that program. In robotics, we're seeing new startups come out, even in our climate tipping points program. I'll just mention this for a second, which is the goal of the climate tipping points program is very audacious. Could we imagine combining modeling and sensing to actually get a verifiable forecasting for tipping points? It's one of the biggest unsolved questions in climate change. And I think a lot of people looked at that program and said, okay, great, but this just feels like a gift to the world. Where's the UK benefit in this? It turns out that program is not only funding cutting-edge modeling efforts of Earth systems, which can be valuable in the capacity of insurance and finance, but also coupling them to sensing and deployment technologies. And so one of the cool examples there was a literally, two-person startup, I think in Southampton, looking at autonomous ocean-based vessels that have now participated in that program, and they've told us that very much because of their participation, they've both connected to an ecosystem and learned and now gotten some investment funding on the back of it. And so that's, I think, a really exciting thing to say that the challenges are catalyzing, these valuable early signs of communities and technical capabilities, and then, of course, capital that's going to need to flow in.
Fantastic. I mean, it's really great to hear all of those wonderful successes. I'm also keen, though, to hear the other side of the coin, right? We've talked a little bit about how failure is so important in science and discovery. What would you say are some of the failures of that first cohort? And then what have you used those failures in terms of lessons learned?
Yeah, I mean, I think, interestingly, for me, there's only one failure, which is that we see something that's suboptimal or that could be improved or isn't working, and we don't take action. And so actually in the first cohort, I think one of the things I'm very proud of is we were able to be very adaptive. So everything from, I mentioned the discovery process, but also, things operationally. Our first set of IP terms that we went and socialized with the ecosystem, university leaders and others, what we actually ended up with is very different because we got that feedback. There are a few things that I think we've learned in the first cohort that I think we haven't yet addressed or solved, that I actually, rather than challenges, would see as opportunities. One is about the role of AI at ARIA. The organization started at a point where, of course, we needed to be AI aware, but we couldn't natively build AI into how we work 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago. I think we're seeing there is an enormous opportunity for ARIA to be a leader in shaping how AI relates not just to science and research, but to how you direct research in this way. So I'll just share an example. Nicole, one of our new program directors, mentioned the other day, based on some of the tools and experimentation we've done, in preparation for a workshop with scientists, she held a workshop with, I think, 20 or 30 virtual agent scientists. Literally held a workshop with a number of AI agents that were being proxies for experts in different fields. So she could essentially beat up the idea and be stronger when she went into the community. And with everything from that to actually how AI tools may contribute to modeling and research. So I think that's one. I'll maybe mention one other, which is we were very hesitant early on, this idea of ARIA should be not a political organization. No one at ARIA is an elected official. We don't represent the taxpayer. So we really have been trying to be responsible about that arm's length role. We're here to create new options of technology. It's policymakers like you who will decide what happens. One of the things that did was pushed us to be a little bit, I think, too distant from thinking about not just the ethical considerations, but that we were in tune with, but the interface with, say, policy and regulation. And so one learning in our neurotech program, we went from not really engaging with the regulators at all to that being a very important piece, because we realized we have insights into the cutting edge of this field that can inform how the regulators are able to think responsibly about the next stages. So I think that's a good learning.
The only thing I'd very quickly add to that is it's still very early. So we expect there to be real failure, we expect there to be programs that we say, well, in the scheme of things that turned out not to be. And I suspect that next time I'm here with you and Ilan's successor, one of the things we'll be talking about in a lot more detail, because it will have happened more, is active portfolio management. And clearly, as a steward of taxpayer money, it's very important, just like in venture capital, that as much as possible, if that money goes into the things that do work. We're not yet at the stage where that's the kind of decision we've had to make, but we will do. And I hope we get to talk about that next time.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and thanks for that really nice summary there, both. Looking forward at the next cohort, at the second set of program directors, I think, Ilan, you said previously you were keen for the second cohort to be a little less academic and a little more industrial in terms of the backgrounds of people that you're recruiting. Do you think that has happened? And then through the recruitment process, if it has happened, was that a strategic decision or did it happen organically?
Yeah, so one of the things we've realized is a great asset in the design of ARIA. When you go fresh, you can do new things. So we made this decision to do a wide open recruitment of program directors and to bring them in as a cohort, as a batch. One of the consequences of that, and now we've said roughly every other year, it's a 3 to 5 year term, so it'll rotate. Every other year we'll probably need to recruit a new batch of program directors. What that allows is us to use that as a cadence for iterating based on our learning in the agency. So when we went to recruit the second cohort, we did a lot of reflection on what have we learned from the first cohort and what may need to look different, or may we want to look different. And one of the reflections was the first cohort is brilliant. 75% of them had primarily academic backgrounds. And we said, well, if we're looking at the composition of the whole group and the diversity of the group, we probably now want to add in a cohort that is majority industrial backgrounds of some sort, and entrepreneurship felt right. So that was a very intentional decision, and we targeted our recruitment both explicitly. We said that we're looking for that, but we also tried to target recruitment in communities and circles where that was the case. And I think that's been very, very successful. I think we were able to, to ultimately, if you look at the new cohort, I mean, they have exceptional technical credibility and backgrounds, but we have a number of people who have either done startups or worked in industry, and the group as a whole is really benefiting from that.
It may be worth emphasizing, it's partly to Dr. Gardner's question as well, ARIA is very small in the scheme of things. Even within the sort of public funding of R&D, ARIA is a very small chunk of it. And I think that allows us to be very opinionated in ways that we couldn't do if we were 90% of public R&D. And so, slightly to Dr. Gardner's question about time horizon, the scope of things that are ARIA ready is actually a relatively narrow slice of all the things that the UK should want to fund. And so this sort of sweet spot of entrepreneurs, scientific entrepreneurs, entrepreneurial scientists, however you want to look at that, who have sort of got something that actually in that window, they've got an idea that could be pursued in that window of time, which is short. It does lead you towards this sort of kind of character. We're not trying to do basic research. And actually, I think it's a really special group that's coming together.
Yeah, well, yeah. And if we're too biased towards thinking about the commercial outcomes, I mean, the entrepreneurs coming in, they're a little more attuned to where's the value going to be up front. But if you're too biased in that direction, then you lose the speculative nature. You don't have a chance to do something transformative. And yet if you're too biased in the opposite direction, so we really need to mix these modes. And I think the fact that we have such a diverse group of program directors with different experiences, but who have a lot of trust and alignment of mission, is one of the very powerful things about what we've built so far.
And a final question from me both. Can you share any detail about the scientific direction of the second cohort?
I'll try and do a quick run through. This is a good test always. So Nathan, I mentioned earlier, is really interested, and we've now launched both an opportunity space and a program thesis around bioenergetic engineering, we're calling it. The thesis is really about can we take the mitochondria, which we know contribute not just to the energy powerhouse of the cell, but contribute to everything from neurological disorders, chronic disease, etc. Can we think about ways to manipulate the genome of the mitochondria to have a tool to understand those disorders, but also solve them? Brian, one of our program directors, is looking at, similar to how Jacques is looking at neurotechnology as a technology insertion point to treat a wide range of diseases. Brian has recognized that the innate immune system is also sort of an underexplored part of our, physiological system that potentially could be precision. There could be precision interventions on innate immunity that allow us to have protection against not just pandemics, but broad viruses, but also help with chronic disease and those sorts of things. Claire, who came into ARIA from AstraZeneca, it's still early in development, but looking in new ways that new sensing and perception technologies combined with AI can be used to drastically improve medical diagnostics. And then we have in materials and industrial tech, a program that we call Manufacturing Abundance, basically trying to question the assumption that in order to make materials at scale and devices at scale sustainable, you have to compromise on the functionality. And we believe that with synthetic biology and other approaches, potentially we can make the most complicated materials at scale through abundant molecules, which is very challenging. I'm a material scientist. I'm going to be the biggest skeptic on anything in that space, and Ivan has really wowed me in what's happening there. We've one looking at advanced aviation and sensing, one looking at engineering natural ecosystems. So in terms of planetary health, we get trillions of pounds for free globally from natural ecosystems, pollinating our agriculture crops, etc. How do we protect and exploit that is a really interesting question. And then I think on sort of comms and IT, or this question of what AI is doing and what do we need to create resilience in society in the context of AI is a hugely important one. A lot of people are thinking about it. Two areas we're looking at there. One is around trust. And really, could AI be used to develop next generation trust protocols, things like cryptographic protocols, both for the increase. If we all have 1,000 AI agents working on behalf, all of those interactions are going to need to be trust-based. How do we do that? But also, we're seeing convergence between digital and physical. Even something like neurotechnology devices. How do we build innately trust into those devices? And then also thinking, so that's it.
There's lots.
Thank you both.
That's all right. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Adam. And it is fascinating hearing you talk about the range of ARIA's work, and it highlights to me that it is the sweet spot that you describe necessarily could have huge implications for society and for the economy. I just want to test that briefly with two follow-up questions to Alan's discussions. So, precision neurotechnologies, you talked about the market that there might be for these technologies. Do you fire off an email to the Secretary of State for Industry and say, this should be part of your industrial strategy, or do you expect Johnny Reynolds to pick it up by reading your reports?
That's a great question. I mean, it's in terms of, so let me make sure I understand the question. Is this like, what do we do to catalyze the potential and think about how the ecosystem is going to be
become part of government, business, and industrial policy, if it should do?
Yeah. I mean, I think
I can take a first stab at this. Yeah.
One thing that I think has been a big success of the first 3 years is, I think, getting the right relationship with government. I think Parliament was very clear in the ARIA Act that ARIA's independence should be very strong. But I think what we've done a good job of is making sure that we nevertheless have a very deep and close relationship.
I think my question, because we will come on to that detailed question, is do you communicate directly to them?
Yeah, so through the DCIT sponsorship team, there's total clarity.
But not necessarily, not directly to industry, the business team.
Industry, yes.
To business team.
To teams outside, to government teams outside DCIT, we tend to use DCIT as our
right.
As our
Okay,
channel for that.
that's great. No, that's great. And then on the climate tipping program, there's been a lot of discussion about the collapse of the Gulf Stream, which is of particular interest to me as you leave Newcastle with the climate of Newfoundland. So you're doing work on that. There's a lot of work going on that particular question. Do you communicate, integrate, work with existing scientists in that, or are you looking further forward?
100%. So in every one of our programs, from the beginning, we are thinking about, to Matt's point earlier, if this is successful, we believe it should not only change the conversation globally about what's possible or valuable, but it should catalyze the next stage of effort towards impact. And oftentimes that's engagement from industry to think about investing in the next stages of these or proving the value, but not necessarily. So in the case of the Tipping Points program, Sarah and Gemma from the beginning have said it doesn't help just to do an academic exercise to think about the probabilities of tipping points. The question is, will that actually add value to society? And so from the beginning, they've engaged, internationally trying to understand how do groups like the IPCC actually think about the...
But just specifically, are you looking at the collapse of the Gulf Stream?
In this case, so that program is focused on the Arctic tipping points. Right. And so the AMOC, potential AMOC collapse is certainly part of that, yeah.
Fantastic, great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lauren.
Lovely, thank you very much. So you've described very, very well your directors, and looking at your corporate plan, I couldn't avoid seeing how many of your program directors were experts in another field and then have transferred in. And I just wondered about how you assess the suitability of new program directors when they're potentially this great idea, potentially in another field, and just, if you could expand on how you do your selection program and program directors.
Yeah, so I think this is a unique attribute of ARIA that we're proud of. At the core, when we select program directors, we're looking, the goal is to find people who we think can succeed at basically going through a discovery process to see these new opportunities and then engage the research community in going after them. And so certainly we look at technical depth and credibility, but that's actually one of a few. The others are things like, do they have an adaptive mindset? Do they have creative independence of thought? And both in selecting the people and in the environment at the agency, we are really encouraging people. So the new group of program directors came in, and one of the things that we said to them was, you likely have strong ideas on a program you want to run. Before you're able to go engage with those ideas, you have to come with at least one other idea based on discovery. And so it's allowed us to have program directors leverage their technical depth and apply it to areas where they can ask sort of new questions and come in with a beginner's mindset. And back to sort of areas of pride, I mean, I look at Jenny Reed, a professor from Newcastle who came in, and she's a vision scientist. She has really sort of computer science expertise, and she said, I want to look at robotics. I think there's something to do in vision science. And at the back end of her process, she said, I think we need to focus on hardware. But I found that the questions I'm asking people, in some ways, I'm asking simple questions, but they're engaging with them differently, and I think there's something new we can do here. So hopefully that will continue.
Yeah, no, that sounds really quite exciting. And just to kind of, I think, build on what Alison was saying about the kind of startup mentality, which is quite exciting, fresh, nimble, as you described it, and then the kind of long-term projects, looking to the future element. What is the balance, I suppose, and how do you choose, actually, that's a long-term future? I mean, the tipping point thing is incredibly important for our long-term future. I'm hoping after you leave us, the next person will also see that it's an incredibly important thing. So I just wondered how, as an organisation, you're keeping nimble, but also eye on the future.
I'm curious Matt's views. I mean, my short answer here is the portfolio is so important.
Yeah.
I mean, everything we do, you've set us up with a mandate where we're meant to go after things where it's not obvious it's going to change the world. And honestly, you won't be able to engineer to that solution. There will be work and discovery and then serendipity. Yeah. We often use the example, one of our advisors is Özlem Türeci from BioNTech. We use the example of mRNA technologies where, DARPA funded that. It wasn't until a few years in they got the first evidence that it could be useful for immunology. That changed the talent, but it wasn't valuable until the pandemic about a decade in. And so we need a really broad portfolio. I mean, the idea of the new program directors, we now have launched 10 of these opportunity spaces. The risk is you have too much breadth. But when we looked at it analytically, the scale of the system in ARIA, we said, we probably need at least a dozen of these, maybe 20 in the first decade, as many as 20. And then we learn. And to Matt's point, we have to be rigorous. And I think the next person in this seat will have to be one of the muscles that they will hopefully be reporting to you that has been built in the agency is across that portfolio saying, actually, based on what we learned in this area, we've decided we're not going to continue funding in this area, but we're going to put twice as much into this other area.
Yeah. I think, one thing, I think it's a great question because I think it comes to the heart of a lot of what we're trying to do. I think the thing that I am excited about is that the test that we have set ourselves at the organizational level is that we shouldn't do a program unless we think that if it succeeded and it was the only thing that succeeded, it would still justify the agency's existence. Yeah. And even if everything else failed, it would work. And in a way, that is actually how startups work. Even startups, in my other life, you're constantly addressing the tension you described, which is that you have to solve the challenge ahead of you, but you have to be thinking 10 or 20 years out. And I actually think that Parliament's given us an extraordinary opportunity to build a sort of venture-like portfolio of science where if one of these things achieves its maximum ambition, it will change the country and the world.
Which is incredibly exciting and leads me very nicely on to my next question, which is about misinformation and scientific directed misinformation. I think your project and the thing that you're doing there is really exciting, and I think the least political interference in what you need to be doing, the better. But we live in a political world, and political world is sadly, great in some respects. But how does ARIA look at combating some of that misinformation, which could potentially end in a threat to the science itself?
Yeah. I think that's right. First of all, I think you've given us a mandate where we're arm's length enough from the politics. We do live in a political world. Yeah. You've given us a mandate where we're arm's length enough from the politics that we should be able to, based on our fundamental assessments of our mandate and what we're seeing in a field, make decisions about where we should focus our funding. But that also, there's a burden of responsibility in terms of trust. That only works if, when you look at how we're doing that, there is sufficient trust. Our climate cooling program was one where we saw that as a space that is just ridden with enormous volumes of misinformation. And the question is, okay, what do we do about that? I mentioned some of the things we built in terms of ethical and social responsibility. But when we started to see responses to that program, and they're real concerns from citizens, it's not that you can't dismiss them. But when we see a lot of responses where we say, actually, it's not clear they've read what we're doing. It's not clear they've engaged with the content here. What can we do? The response is not, let's make this more secret. It's actually been the opposite. We need to lean more heavily into transparency. And so I think the learning for us has been, it will take more resources and it'll take more attention. But in the case of the climate cooling program, our website has an FAQ with basically all of the questions we've had. We've actually published all the way down to the proposals and contracts that we've done there. And what that means is if someone really does want to engage, we can point them to, here's what we're really doing. By the way, there's nothing that's releasing toxic chemicals into environment in this program. I understand why you might be worried about that, but just look, it's not there. And I think that's the best we can do.
I think this is actually a good example of what a well-functioning relationship between the agency and government and policymakers should be. And actually, in some ways, although it was honestly quite unpleasant for a lot of ARIA staff, I think, they I think dealt with it very well. I think in some ways I'm glad that we had this challenge at this stage, because actually I think the relationship with DSIT in particular, and I do want to thank the Secretary of State for his extremely robust defence of ARIA's independence, but also of the need for scientific freedom. Like progress requires that people explore things that would not come out of a committee, and actually I think DSIT worked really well with the agency to reinforce that message, and then that was a crucial test for this mandate, which I think we collectively passed.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lauren. Steve?
Great, thank you, Chair, and thank you very much so far. Whilst noting that a couple of things actually we talked about this morning, plant biology and synthetics, and tipping points are programs that are funded through Exeter University, which is fantastic. When you look at the allocation of funding from ARIA, over 50% still goes to London and the South East. Southwest 4.7%, other regions around 4, just over 4% as well. What's your defence of why over half of that goes of your funding goes to London and the South East?
I think for me at least, everything comes back to the mandate and what are we doing. Our goal is, well, first of all, the mission that we've stated, which is unlock science and technology breakthroughs for everyone. And we think about that as for everyone in the UK. We're clearly diversity of our engagement and funding is critical to that mission. And if you look at it, we've funded, stats aside, we've funded almost every region of the UK now is engaged in ARIA's work and projects. What I'd say is what's unique about ARIA is when we think about, and I think this drives diversity for us, when we think about excellence, we get a proposal. Oftentimes a funding agency will get a proposal and we'll say, is this an excellent proposal? Is it an excellent institution or an excellent person? There can be a lot of biases in that. The credibility of the individual who's applying in terms of credentials, the institution they're coming from in terms of the stereotypes of that institution. We have a program director for every program who has spent a lot of time developing a thesis and a theory of change. And then they are putting out a proposal saying, I want proposals that we think in a coordinated way can advance this, neurotechnology, programmable plants. And excellence for a proposal is specifically related to how does it fit into that theory of change and that thesis. And what that does, what I've seen in the agency that I'm very proud of, is cases where as part of that review and selection process, and we have external peer reviewers, someone will say, well, an external reviewer will say in a panel, how could you not fund X? I mean, look at their track record and background and credibility. They are the best in the field. And our program director will say, well, this postdoc over here, their idea is much closer to what we're looking for. And so no matter what this person has done in the past, this is the thing I want to fund. And likewise, I think that happens institutionally. So if you look at our projects and geographically, I still remember Angie presented the selections for our seed awards for programmable plants. I said to her, wow, many of these are entrepreneurial, and is it possible not one of these is in the southeast of England? And she said, yeah, that's how it shook out. And so I think rather than think that there's some trade-off between the diversity and the excellence of funding, I think for us they're the same, and it's early. I mean, one thing that's clear is initially institutions and folks that felt like they should apply to ARIA because it was sort of a bold, ambitious thing, I think probably did bias towards more Southeast institutions, and I think we're seeing that spread. We have a commitment, last point on this, which is one of the learnings from the first cohort was in the discovery process, the top of the funnel, when a program director is shaping a program, we need to put extra effort in engaging outside of the Southeast. Not surprisingly, and we did it, but even more so now. So right now I think we have 2 program directors, Ivan and Brian, who basically have scheduled, what I would call, road trips across the UK. It's more train trips. But 8, 9 regions of the country, they're engaging with researchers. And so we'll see, how the implications of that in terms of who we fund moving forward.
Would you like to see a greater sort of balancing of your funding across the entire country?
The thing that we talk about internally is you shouldn't be afraid that you're going to fund something and it doesn't work. You should be very afraid that you're going to put out a thesis and miss the person who could have contributed to that. And so what I hope to see is that the best people who can contribute to these things are engaging and applying, and we fund the ones that can move the mission forward.
Thank you. Alison, did you have a quick... Thanks very much, Steve.
Complete addition to Steve's question. I noticed in that West Midlands has only got 0.8% of your funding. It really stands out quite starkly amongst all of the other regions. Why is that, and I'm a West Mids MP. What do I need to do to shake that up a bit?
It's a good question. I'd say that's something we should look into. And rather than respond quickly, I think what we found is we're very open. Anytime an institution reaches out to us saying, or a region or a group that's regionally based saying, how do we engage better with ARIA? We take those very seriously. And so I would just say, let the institutions there know that maybe that's something they should do. I think communications is a gap. We're a small, as Matt mentioned, we're a small agency, and we now have a lot going on. And so how do we make sure that, any one group actually realizes that they should be engaging and that there are opportunities there?
That's a very good message to come out of this session. For institutions to engage with ARIA. Who should they engage with?
So
what email address?
Yeah, it's great. When I meet people, I give out my email address. It's my first name dot last name. I should
Excellent. That's fantastic.
At the org. That's fine. Great. I'm happy to have it.
Kit.
Just before I move on to my question, I wanted to ask a follow-up from Lauren Adams. You talked a lot in positivity about your program directors and staff body. In my experience, people with theses are quite often difficult to handle, and particularly if they have an entrepreneurial streak. What does kind of turnover look like? Was everybody a success? Did you have to say, look, we just can't handle you? I mean, as I say, you've talked about it in kind of glowing terms, but you must have HR difficulties.
We've lost a program director.
No, I was going to say, had you asked me at the beginning when we recruited the first cohort, would there be attrition? They're all very special in many different ways and sometimes in frustrating ways. I would have thought there would have been at least one that just didn't work out for some reason. I think we've been lucky that wasn't the case.
Right. Well, I remember saying to you that my biggest worry was that 8 wasn't enough because we would just not. Maybe we'd get 4 programs out of 8 program directors. And I was completely wrong. We've got 1 for 1 so far.
I think, look, one of the hard parts of an agency like this is that talent is exceptional. And we've created a very, for lack of a better word, we've created an intense high-pressure environment for them. They have 3, maybe 5 years to get something done.
Yeah.
They have this uncertainty around what's next.
There must be a lot of shouting in the office.
Not so much shouting. I mean, we're British enough where there's not so much shouting. But what that means is they wake up every morning saying, how do I get the next part of this done? And one of the ways that will present as a constant challenge for ARIA is you have the rest of the organization, the operational staff and otherwise, which is just saying, hey, my job is not to, I understand your job is to create the most incredible snowflake of a program you want to do, pull out all of the stops. Like, we have to build a factory here that can put out government funding in an accountable way. Yeah. And so, I think back to culture, the fact that we have a team as a whole that is willing to acknowledge those different incentives and say, this is part of it, and this is part of the dynamics.
It probably is worth emphasising. I mean, this may be obvious to the committee, but probably not to all stakeholders, that, this role of a program director is really unusual. They're not a researcher, they're not doing research, but nor are they a funder in the sense that, their counterparts in UKRI would be funders. They're doing this very strange role that's a hybrid CEO, VC, PI role, and it's we've put an enormous amount of thought into how do you actually serve those people? How do you create an environment where they can succeed? And a lot of the sort of finer points of the org design actually come down to how do you help these very unusual talents thrive. And I actually think the thing that may not be obvious from the outside that's worth emphasizing is the remarkable degree of camaraderie across those people. And actually, because there is this sort of slight hair on fire, I've got 3 years to get somewhere, actually I think you can imagine a world where that results in a lot of shouting and tension. Actually, I think they really want to support and amplify each other, and I think that's been a really powerful thing.
As you rotate out, what protections are in place to stop them joining organisations that they've funded?
Oh yeah. So we have a comprehensive conflict of interest policy which starts at when they're coming into the agency. basically they can't fund anything where they could be seen in any way as having certainly a financial interest, but also as competing at all with the projects that they fund. The trust of a program director with the projects we're funding is essential. In terms of the back end, we actually haven't had program directors leave. We're in the process now of developing the policies for, as an example, as soon as you are thinking about your transition and you begin a conversation with an organization about potentially joining them, you immediately have to notify us and recuse yourself and have that conflict surfaced. And so those sorts of policies will be in place for that.
Okay, so there's currently no restriction. If one of them says, look, I'm leaving because I'm joining this organisation to which I gave 10 million quid.
There is a policy in development.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. We don't expect the first program directors to leave for another 18 months at earliest.
But people may decide to leave earlier.
Yeah, they may. Yeah.
So when do you think that policy will be complete?
I think our plan is to have it for the next board meeting, which is
4 weeks.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know whether it'll be approved there.
I guess I asked the question because I'm now reaching towards the kind of governance and accountability agenda. You've talked in glowing terms about your interaction with the department and with the politicians and the free hand, but in my experience, there's a strong possibility that the civil servants you deal with are possibly wincing at the notion that you're effectively a big write-off for them. In the worst case, you're just a big write-off. What does that kind of daily interaction, not at a political level, but at an operational level with the department, what does it look like? How often do you meet? What level of person do you meet? Do you have a named person in the department? What information do they ask from you about how does your money flow? Do you get one big bung of 800 million quid, or do you have to call it off when you need it? Is there an approval mechanism? What does that kind of machine look like?
Yeah, maybe I'll give a quick version. Matt may have more to add. I mean, just to remind everyone of the governance by your intent in the mandate, we see overall organizational governance as being the responsibility of the board of directors. The programmatic technical decisions are happening within the organization, but the board of directors is thinking about the processes, fiscal management, all of the normal things. And then obviously our funding is through government and DCIT, and so the accountability there really is on the fiscal side of things, and then making sure that the board is doing their job in the overall accountability. We have a few, and I'll just echo to Matt's point, there are a lot of ways where ARIA could have unfolded where the interface with government was a real challenge and a real risk point. And I think the team at DCIT, in particular the civil servants, I think came into this understanding this is something different. And we've established a really great relationship there. We have a few touch points with DCIT, just to be specific. I and our CFO and COO, Antonia Jenkinson, who's brilliant, meet occasionally anytime from once a month to once every 2 months with Alex Jones, who's deputy at DCIT. We also have then direct connectivity on the fiscal side with the head of finance, which Antonia, the CFO, is in regular touch with. And then we have a sponsorship team, and our chief of staff is also in regular touch with the sponsorship team, thinking to the point earlier about what are all of the ways where things that we're learning at ARIA should flow back into different parts of government, and what are things happening that DCIT has questions about or is concerned with. And we've managed to make that, I think, again, through trust, both effective and efficient.
Yeah. Right, so when you say there's a sponsorship team,
sorry, yeah, that's language that I've learned.
This is a level in your department, in your organisation, which is talking to a level in the department on a kind of real-time basis about what you're up to and what you're spending money on.
That's right. We don't have many levels at ARIA, but within DCIT, there's a group.
A very similar arrangement that you would have with any arm's length body.
Yeah, I know, I understand. So then in terms of the money, right, do you have to call it off when you need it? Is there an approval mechanism for that? And do you have to say, right, we need 80 million quid this month because we're investing in X, Y, Z, and that all has to go to the Treasury, and the Treasury say, we don't like this, we do like that. How does it work?
So I would say that the mechanisms are similar to other arm's length bodies the sense that we have as part of the spending review process, and otherwise we're submitting projections of our spend. The big differences are, that ARIA has sort of a single business case that has been approved, and so we are not going back and asking permission from DCID or Treasury for each of the programmatic decisions that we're making. It would be almost impossible because those are shifting adaptively. And then the other difference is that because of the adaptability of what we're doing and the fact that even though I have planned to approve, we've planned to put out, let's say, 6 or 7 programs over the next 6 months, we're having approval meetings, and I expect that at least one of those we won't approve because it won't be good enough on that time frame, and so that may move the funding timeline. And so the flexibility of funding, I think, is a difference.
Yeah, no, I understand. I guess the question I was more asking was more about basic kind of cash flow. Right. So in my experience, the way arm's length bodies work is they call off their funding. Yes, you're approved this year for 800 million quid,
yes,
but you call it off in lumps as and when you need it.
Exactly.
And it's at that point of call off that very often the kind of mid-level intervention takes place, and the kind of granular, but supervision happens. So when the Met Police need their funding, they have to call it off from the Home Office, and there's some kind of supervision that takes place there. So is it similar for you?
No, so that's where the single business case kicks in. So absolutely, we don't just take the money. It's not sitting in an ARIA bank account. It is called off exactly as you're describing, as needed. But there's not a separate approvals or scrutiny process at that point.
So you don't have to make a case.
No, the case is made once.
Just say, send us 100 million quid, no questions asked.
I mean, obviously, we explain what it's for, but yeah, there's not an approval process there.
So that's why I'm asking you, explain what it's for. So you say, we want to spend it on these 5 investments.
Yes. Well, and keep in mind, everything that's in development at ARIA is transparent. So we've already said it publicly.
I understand.
That's not.
When you say, I'm sorry to push the point on detail, but it's important. But so when you say we want to spend it on these 5 investments, what level of detail are you providing to the department on each of those 5 investments?
No. So when we, on that cadence of every month or quarter, whenever we need to call funding, there is not a programmatic conversation happening. Right.
It's finance to finance conversation.
That's a finance to finance conversation.
Yeah. And the
I think that's the intent, because if there was.
You think it's finance to finance conversation, but actually it's finance to treasury conversation. And the question is how often you get a call from the Treasury or a call from finance saying, Treasury have asked these follow-up questions about why you need 100 million quid this month. I'm trying to explore the level of freedom that you're given, right? And whether they may not have exercised it so far.
That has not happened.
There may come a point at which the Treasury say, do you know what? So having difficulty selling on that.
It's a great question, and I think this is one of the. You're exactly right that the devil is always in the detail, and I think one of the things that's been a success of the agency so far is actually that the civil service has not only respected the letter of the ARIA Act and the delegation agreement, framework agreement, but also the spirit of it. So we've not had that, and we had extensive negotiations with Treasury on the way in to establish those norms, and I think we've had a very productive relationship with Treasury on that.
I don't know how other funding bodies or arm's length bodies work. I just echo that. We also had intensive scrutiny from Treasury around our budgets in part of the spending review process, strategically, but we don't have those issues.
And so it was advertised last year in the run-up to the spending review and the budget that there was a widespread kind of in-year attempt at savings programs across all departments, right? So the Treasury was looking for any money it could grab. Did you get a call from finance at DCIT saying, we need you to find some economies?
No.
Not that I'm aware of, no.
The bung is a bung is a bung. It comes without questions.
We've not had any problems in this regard at all.
Very good. All right, thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Kit. Emily, yes. You ready to follow up?
I do. I have. So I'm going to... Because you're leaving, Ilan, and because, Matt, you have such a breadth of experience, I wanted to get your wider reflections on a few issues that we've been talking about within the committee, so wider than ARIA, but more it's just following up on some of the questions that we've had from colleagues. What are the learnings from this initial period of ARIA, particularly around risk, that potentially could help shape the future of the catapults and Innovate UK, in terms of how you're approaching it, and some of the risk averseness that we've seen in some of the other innovation funding programs?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to comment on their risk appetite, but I can talk about ARIA, obviously. I think one thing that is really, you'll be aware, but again, like others may not, that, actually the risk appetite for ARIA is one of the things referenced in the statute. And that's extremely helpful for us. It's both helpful for shaping the internal culture, but it's also helpful for all our external interactions, including with things like the National Audit Office, which obviously is a really key part of our governance. And I think, my reflection would be that for an agency that seeks to, dispense public funds that doesn't have that to fall back on by statute, I can imagine it's much more challenging. So that'd be the first thing. Obviously, we have a very standard way across government of measuring value for money, and that's absolutely right. ARIA obviously also has to provide value for money, but the statute makes very clear that there is a deliberate intent from Parliament that is done in a high-risk, high-reward way, and that's been crucial to our ability to do what we've done. So that would be probably my first learning. And then sort of building on Kit's question, I think then culturally you then have to embed that in the system. There's what the law says, and then there's the spirit with which it's enforced. And I think people, partly because I think it had such cross-parliamentary support at the time of the passing of the Act, I think there's been a very strong sense that ARIA should be different, and that it is a bold experiment that we collectively want to try and make work. So I think that's the other learning for in general for the agency, is without that, it would be very challenging. And then I think the third thing is the bit that Ilan already talked about, which is about independent governance by a board. So the board does not get involved at the programme or project level. If it did, I imagine ARIA would be a lot less successful. The whole point is this ability to take bold risks, not by committee. But what the board does do is really debate in detail and scrutinise and challenge what the overall risk appetite of the organisation is. And that's obviously a very multidimensional thing. I mean, our risk appetite on the financial side is zero. We're not, we have absolutely no desire to take risks in certain spaces. Where we're really thinking about the risks we do want to take, it's the stuff we've been talking about earlier, like this programme might fail completely. And we're happy with that. And I think having a board that can have a serious conversation about risk, and I think we're very lucky to have a board where the backgrounds of the people who serve really equip them to do that, I think that allows us to get to this point where the executive and the non-executive directors have a shared understanding of where we want to land without reference to an outside group. And that, again, is, I think, unusual in a global context, certainly in a UK context.
Yeah, I guess for somebody was involved in setting up the Technology Strategy Board, for me, the things that, setting up of ARIA almost feels like a failure, because that's what we tried to do within the Technology Strategy Board, which is now Innovate UK. And I guess from my perspective is, we tried to build that risk in. We looked at the DARPA models. It was catapults were based on Fraunhofer. For me, I feel a little bit like, as much as ARIA is a fantastic thing and I'm quite excited about it, it's almost like we've had to do it because the risk appetite has not stayed high as it's transformed into Innovate UK and other sorts of things. How do we prevent that over the years happening to ARIA?
Yeah. I mean, as you may know, I used to serve on the board of Innovate UK and have a huge amount of respect for that organisation. What I would say is a little bit like the spirit of iteration we've been talking about with programs. I think ARIA is set up just very differently from Innovate UK. Innovate UK, there is a board, but it's not the governance board. That's not where governance sits in Innovate UK. It doesn't have that separate risk mandate. So again, I think Innovate UK is doing a fantastic job. But if you wanted it to be more like ARIA, I think you need some of these, either statutory or other provisions to give it that set of mechanisms.
Yeah.
I might just mention one thing on the back of that, which could be insightful. To the point of ARIA is structured differently. One of the big assets that we have that allows us to take risks is just the the scale of the organization and the size and this program director model. What do I mean by that? We have 16 program directors. Anything that we're funding in the agency came out of an enormous amount of thought for them in terms of a thesis, a review process. Any major funding decision that we made, they were intentional, ran a review process, I approved it. If you get the 17 of us around a table and you ask us any question about anything happening in the agency, someone will know exactly why we did it, what the status of it is, and I will be able to defend why we made that decision. And so that allows us to do a lot of things and keep tabs on a lot of things, which otherwise, someone would ask a question, you don't know, you lose trust, et cetera, and that's a hard thing to replicate. And so one of the things that we constantly, and it's been great to have such a good relationship with UKRI to think about, how does ARIA fit in? Mm-hmm. It is this sense of, ARIA is a bit of a different beast. It obviously has to complement and activate. ARIA doesn't succeed if you don't have a UKRI and Innovate UK that are wonderfully strong in the base. But in the best case, these things interact and work with each other because they're organizationally different in really productive ways that increase the effectiveness of the whole. And I think that's the vision, but that's also started to feel like the reality of it.
Fantastic. That's really interesting reflections and things that we should consider as we're looking at the innovation landscape.
Emily, sorry, there's just maybe a good point to ask a question about ARIA's advisors, because you've talked about governance and you talked about relationship with outside organizations. You have a set of advisors, which includes the CEO of Google DeepMind, the CEO of the Royal Academy of Engineering, the founder of an expert on mRNA. They're not in your governance and accountability org chart. Can you just say what their role is, and are they responsible for helping you to keep you at this cutting edge?
Yeah, very simple answer there. When we started the agency, we wanted to make sure to signal across the UK that the intent of this agency is to touch everyone across disciplines, but to have an ambition around global change with science innovation. And so we recruited this set of advisors really to be a signal for talent around the level of ambition, and not just talent, but talent in different communities. And so there you have electrical engineers, you have climate scientists, you have certainly UK represented, but also global networks. And that's actually been very effective. The advisors do not have any governance role. And actually, we don't even share confidential information from the organization with them. They are basically signals to talent and communities, and then they do provide helpful soundboarding advice from their experience, which has been great.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah.
Emily.
So I wanted to take you back to something you alluded to around AI. This is broad. These are broader questions than just the role of ARIA and AI, but really about talking about, Matt, you were really involved in the AI opportunities paper and our plans in government. How do we create that USP for the UK within the AI field? I'll start with that, and then I'll come into something a little bit more specific.
Yeah, I mean, I'll try and be brief because I can talk about this for way too long.
What I'm interested in is, what is our USP?
Yeah.
I understand. Not the pillar. I don't want to rehash the whole.
I will not rehash the Opportunities Action Plan, of which I am proud. The opportunity for the UK is that, and it's actually very similar to the ARIA story. There are parallels. Is the extraordinary concentration of AI talent that we have here, thanks to our universities, thanks to the fact that Google DeepMind, which you just mentioned, was founded here. You've got this incredible spillover and clustering effect in the UK. I think we have two big opportunities that are unusual. One, Ilan has actually mentioned, which is that the technology is now at the stage where its ability to make a real difference in industries and sectors outside its own lane is now. Mm-hmm. And because the UK has real strengths outside AI in some of the areas that are most likely to be affected by AI now, we have the opportunity to be the global capital of those intersections. I'm talking about AI meets life sciences, AI meets science more general. I hope ARIA can play a role in that. AI and finance. These are areas where we can and should win. And I think that you're already starting to see that, but there's more to do. The other is, I'm a little bit biased here, but government adoption is going to be really key to shaping this technology. There are fantastic AI researchers around the world doing great work in, say, AI for healthcare. But unless that's embedded in a health system, it's not going to have impacts on people's lives. And so that's not something that you can solve in a lab. That's something that you can only solve by direct engagement with people on the front line. And so I think the opportunity for the UK, partly because this government, the last government, have seen that AI is, has an unusually important role in this country's future, is to actually be the most muscular, the most forward adopter of AI in public services, and in doing so shape not just the technology, but I think like the experience of the technology for people up and down the country.
Yeah, no, I mean, as you know, as being the MP for Milton Keynes, I am a big fan of Edge AI and then the experience, the opportunities within the UK of absolutely accelerating that adoption, but transforming those services that we have such strength in. One of the areas that I wanted to talk to you about is that can really stop this AI is the assurance and transparency, particularly within large language models. We saw quite recently Grok have some really interesting experiences, not least when people asked it what was the best leader to deal with the recent Texas floods. It responds to deal with such vile anti-white hate, Adolf Hitler, no question. But also, XAI, their response worried me even more, because they said XAI is training only truth-seeking. And thanks to the millions of users on X, we are able to quickly identify and update the model. We know the toxic world that is on X. If it's the X users training the model, we have no transparency around that. We have no assurances around that. Could one of the UK's USPs within a world that's dominated by the US and China is that we have the safest AI, we have the standards around AI, we have the transparency. Is that a role for, I appreciate this is much wider than, but is that a role that the UK plays in, rather than trying to chase, we're going to be the creators of the best large language models, but be the creators of that safety and assurance model that should be required across AI? Well,
and clearly, I'll leave to DSIT to comment on the sort of the regulatory piece. But
your personal opinion.
Here's what I will say. I think that we do have in this country, in the AI Security Institute, the most remarkable concentration of AI research talent, I think, in any, certainly Western government in the world. The fact that there are, I think, now 80 plus machine learning researchers working across the road in DSIT on exactly the challenges you're describing, I think is remarkable and unusual globally. And that does give us the chance to be at the forefront of that conversation, both technically, it sort of goes back to what Ilan said about ARIA broadly, by having technical excellence, you provide options to policymakers. And I think that, successive governments have chosen to invest in that, I think with great success. And I think it does give the UK at least the opportunity to lead that conversation around the world.
Ilan, your outgoing reflections, you've looked a lot at the sector. You're not from Britain, so you've seen it from a global perspective. Where do you see those opportunities for the UK creating that USP, creating that on a personal level? There's personal views.
Yeah, I think I would go back to Matt's initial point, which is, one of the powerful things about the UK, certainly R&D and technology system, is the concentration. Yeah. Within a small geographic area, relatively small, you have incredible concentration of talent and frontier capability across different disciplines. I did my PhD at Berkeley. One of the great things about Berkeley is you walk from one hall over to the other and you move from the world-leading experts in Chaucer to the world-leading experts in machine learning, and incredible things happen at those intersections. And I would say one anecdote, it's London-based, but one anecdote is I'd heard of the Crick Institute before I moved here, but I'd actually never seen the building. And as you know, our initial sort of makeshift office for ARIA was in the British Library. I looked out the window and I said, "What's that building?" And someone said, "Oh, that's the Crick." And I said, "Wow, it's 10 times bigger than I imagined based on my understanding of the research happening there." I didn't know. And then I learned that it literally was a 2-minute walk from the Crick to DeepMind. And I thought to myself, like, if you needed just a manifestation of the concentration and the intersection of those frontiers that could lead to just leading the world, I mean, that one in particular, AI and biomedicine, is just an enormous opportunity. I don't think there's anything new there.
I appreciate that. You wouldn't have known that taking it through government as Project Bliss was one of the things that got a lot of scars on my back from, but was worth the effort. Finally, just a final question for me, and I know we all have to run off to PMQs to get seats. We've just seen in the last couple of days Anthropic settled on a copyright case. Matt, you and I have talked about AI and copyright before. One that, trying to get us into a good situation that supports both our creatives and supports a burgeoning AI sector. What do you think the impact of that Anthropic settling on that copyright case is going to have in terms of this debate that we have not settled in the UK yet around where we get that balance?
I'm going to first confess that one of the privileges of leaving Number 10 is I no longer feel compelled to read the judgments of every case that comes out in California, but I'm aware of what you're talking about. Look, I think like one of the key topics, one of the key questions in this debate, which has rightly been intense in this country, has been the UK's role in the world, and I think in my view, it's very important that there's a realism about that. About we cannot really act alone on this, and we need to put our own decision about where to land on this question within a global context. So I think it will be very important. There's other cases to come in the US. I think it will be important to see how they play out in order to understand where the UK fits in that global landscape. But there's the Anthropic one, but there's multiple others with OpenAI and Meta, and I think my sense is that by the end of the year there'll be a lot more clarity on what the US overall position is, and that hopefully will allow policymakers to make an informed decision about what the UK should do.
I hope you move a bit faster than that, but because it's not great at the moment. I think what was interesting to me, and I wanted to know if it was interesting, is the change of attitude of a major AI company to copyright. And do you think that we're seeing a change in the industry's attitude potentially to the copyright question?
Again, I think it's really hard to say. I think the challenging thing that in the US context is because there isn't legislative clarity. There's a lot of cases ongoing with a lot of nuances, and I think it will be very hard to see until some of those other cases get resolved exactly where the industry lands. But certainly what I can say is that in the engagement that I've done with those companies, I think they're really open-minded to what is the right solution that works for everyone. And clearly the hard thing about any of these topics, as you know extremely well, is that the technology moves a lot faster than the legislative process.
100%.
You inherently can't have an industry which is copywriting its own programming but not respecting the intellectual property of others.
And that's
there's an internal conflict there which is not sustainable.
And to follow up on Kit's point, which is
looked like you wanted to come in there.
I don't have anything unique to add. I'm just enjoying the conversation.
We respect your professional views on this and personal views on this. What do you? Because it's clearly a very live debate. What you'll have looked at is the long-term, not short-term successes of these industries, but the long-term successes, and looking at where we're going in the future. That's part of what you've been doing. What do you think is the right place?
It's funny, I'll be honest, what was going on in my mind as I was listening to the conversation was what I think I'm now conditioned to do, which is think about Are there opportunities where there might be a technology intervention that could help with this? And, should we be brainstorming something internal to ARIA to say, well, if only you could quantitatively track how these things are training, et cetera. So I think it is a really... It's an important challenge to solve, but I don't have anything.
It's linked to that transparency and assurance piece, and as my colleague Samantha has kind of coined, can our USP be the safest AI?
Well, I think, Ilan, to your question, there clearly is a technology intervention, and technology can help be the solution to some of these challenges. And I've found it disappointing that technology companies haven't come forward with some of the solutions. But Matt, you were the advisor. You are the Prime Minister's. You were the Prime Minister's advisor on AI during the time that, for example, the copyright consultation, AI copyright consultation, was put out. You clearly have been advising government and the Prime Minister on this. So can you just say specifically on the copyright issue? You seem to be saying that we should be waiting until the US. Waiting for US legislative clarity. Can we not lead in this area, and can we not set out, should we not be setting, in fact, must we not set out what we think the clear principles are?
Yeah. So to clarify, I actually wasn't involved in I came into that role after the consultation went out, so I had no part in the drafting of the government's position on that. I think this is a case where we just have to decide what role we can play in the world, but I think we have to be realistic about, where, I think a thing that's often lost in the debate at the moment is that at the moment, the large tech companies, the Anthropics, are not training in the UK. There is no training of large language models in the UK because of our existing rules on copyright. So we could tighten those rules, but at the moment there is no training in the UK.
When you say there's no training in the UK, you mean that they are not taking any content produced by UK content?
Oh, I mean that there is no there are no companies building large language models.
They're not building large language models, but they are training on UK generated data.
So we clearly, Parliament can do what it wants, but to tighten the rules further would require an extraterritorial claim on training that happens outside the UK. Now that's a choice you could make, but I'm saying that I think that is often lost in the debate.
That would be your message to UK content producers that the UK does not have the power to influence the situation.
No, I don't have a message to UK content producers, but I think your question is could we set out our stall? I think my point is we have a very the current position is there is no training in the UK because of our position on copyright.
And with regards to some of the points that Emily raised as well, there's often considered to be a trade-off between innovation and sort of regulation. That applies, we've talked about some of the issues with regard to AI security. You are looking at future technologies with huge potential. Is the AI an example of how that trade-off between innovation and regulation should be considered in your view, Matt Clifford?
I actually would challenge that the tension is certainly not a binary tension. I actually think in many ways regulation can create markets, and I think that's a really important an important point. One of the reasons that the UK has had enormous success, for example, in fintech, is actually because of regulation that created and shaped new markets. Things like open banking were an important regulation without which we wouldn't have the neobanks that have become the core of the UK startup ecosystem. And I'm not an expert in other fields, but my guess is that actually that's a pretty consistent story. Now clearly regulation that is poorly designed can crush innovation. I'm certainly not suggesting you go out and try and regulate everything in the hope of creating new markets. But I think to me the question is always, where is regulation pro-openness?
Thank you. I was not suggesting. I know my last role before coming to Parliament was with Ofcom, and I think I said that the often is considered to be a tension. I would agree with you entirely. It's an opportunity, not necessarily a tension. Now,
not to confuse regulations and standards either. Standards could become absolutely a drive for innovation and market advantage.
Standards are a necessity for innovation and also for effective competition, and that's another issue when it comes to AI and the opportunities for the UK. But now, Tom, we haven't heard from Tom.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering if you might be able to outline any concerns that you have that ARIA in the UK might be losing out to top researchers to the US or Europe because of immigration rules in the UK. How are you specifically trying to attract talent, and what changes would you like to see to the immigration system to maintain that recruitment and training of global talent?
I'm going to take that. I can. I think the answer to how we attract global talent is actually a great one, which is in creating ARIA, what you all did in the mandate and ultimately having the foundation of the agency, it is a magnet for global talent. And I would say not only the team, we're attracting people into ARIA's team, that has been very effective, but as many of you know, we've said that for ARIA to maintain it, to satisfy the mandate, we need to have global ambitions. We need to be frontier globally. And so we haven't restricted the funding from ARIA to only UK teams. People can apply internationally. But we basically say if you're going to apply internationally, you have to convince us. We have to be convinced that it can benefit the UK, either by increasing the success of the program or because you have an intent to do research in the UK. We've now had, I think, 7 organizations that have set up subsidiaries or in the UK, including, I mentioned Neurotech. Motif is a neurotech company. It's a leading company in the US that, in order to participate in our program, wanted to work very closely with Mint, which is a company here that does circuitry. And they basically said, in order to succeed, we see an opportunity to set up a subsidiary in the UK. So I think that's happening. We actually have 2 of, I think, the world's leading seed venture investors that have moved and set up shops here as part of our activation partnership program. To your point, we have seen, I think if you just look, we have seen and heard that both in terms of the cost of visas, et cetera, but also the friction of the process, that can be a challenge for the research community. In terms of attracting talent to ARIA, we haven't had that challenge. The real implication has been we've just had to work harder to work with, handhold the people that are coming into our agency, but we're able to sponsor them under Global Talent Visa. That's been a very effective scheme. I'd say the one area that I think is probably an opportunity is talent that wants to move over to do something entrepreneurial. We have scientist entrepreneurs who want to come over as our programs. That's where we've seen some challenges because it's a lot harder to get through the process if you're not going to be sponsored by ARIA or a leading academic or any academic institution. It's harder for them to do the move, but actually those are the people that I think you want to move because they want to come and build value here. And so if there was something to focus on, I would say sort of how do you allow more of the world's top science entrepreneurs to come here, because many of them do want to.
Thank you.
Right. We don't have a hard stop, as I understand it. I have a few follow-up questions, but I know that there are others in the room who need to leave for PMQ. So if those members need to leave, that's fine. Alison, did you have a point?
It's just a quick question following on from Emily's. We've got the AI assurance plan due to be, the government's produced a report on that to come out. Could that be our USP? Because that field of AI assurance is very patchy, with a lot of people wanting to sort of give their own assurance, but it's not really controlled and there's no statutory guidance on it, really. Is that not an opportunity for the UK to be a leader in what could be a multi-billion-pound industry of AI assurance?
I certainly think it's part of it. I think that the next big thing that needs to happen for AI to have a positive economic impact in the real world, as it were, is for companies large and small to adopt it. And I think you're certainly right that companies will only adopt AI that they feel is safe, trustworthy, transparent, all the things that Emily mentioned. And so I think absolutely there's a role in being a country that's at the forefront of that, alongside all the other things that we mentioned. I think these are, one of the things that's very powerful is ecosystem building. I think we've referred to that actually in lots of different ways across the answers we've given to lots of different questions, that really the UK's strength lies in being a place where talent is attracted. And my hope would be that, you know, one of the positive spillovers of having something like the AI Security Institute in DSET is that it attracts a lot of complementary talent to complementary parts of it. So I certainly think that it's an area where the UK can play and win, and hopefully that has benefits beyond the immediate piece.
I may be able to add just a perspective here from ARIA, which is we have a very unique program at ARIA that is thinking about assurance and verification of AI. In this case, specifically thinking about the idea that one of the biggest barriers to adoption of AI will be, one of the biggest potential value creators will be the intersection of AI with cyber-physical systems. So if you look at everything from manufacturing to controlling the grid to robotics, you now have an AI that's going to be implemented in the physical world. And that creates a different set of challenges and risks. David, our program director, recognized that actually there is a dearth of overlap between the mathematics community, specifically the formal mathematics community, which thinks about, you know, verification type ideas theoretically, and AI researchers, and basically said there may be an opportunity to think about this problem differently and have mathematics allow you to have at least probabilistic, if not actually deterministic, guarantees on how an AI will perform in different systems. The reason I bring this up is one of the challenges and one of the things we had to think through was, you know, okay, even if it works, how would it be adopted? It won't be adopted if it's seen as something that squashes the value that could come out of AI. It needs to be value additive. And so early in that program, David, to his credit, said, I'm going to try and find who are the people within industry who have applications where this capability would add value because it would allow them to adopt AI. And then these interesting things come out of it. So one of the things that's catalyzed, there's a project now, a collaboration between University of Birmingham and AstraZeneca that is specifically looking at these new methodologies to enable AI to control manufacturing of therapeutics, specifically in cases where that is because of the lack of understanding of what those controls would do and the implications to the drugs. It's not something that they can automate right now, and it would be very valuable and to allow us to create those things. So I think that's, you know, I think that there's probably a broader implication there around where does the verification really allow expansion of value creation.
I really like that answer because that is the value of ARIA, where you can take a new perspective on a difficult problem and turn it on its head. That's a really good answer. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Just a couple of follow-up questions, and I appreciate your spending time with us this morning. So successive governments have said that the freedom of information obligation would hinder ARIA's agility, and you've mentioned a number of times that ARIA is a small organisation. It is the case that DARPA in the US is subject to freedom of information. What is your view on that issue?
I think there's an important point here is that there's a big difference from being exempt from freedom of information and wanting to have a culture of opacity or secrecy. And we are, as you say, by statute, exempt from freedom of information. But as Ilan's emphasised a number of times this morning, we've actually taken, I think, one of the most radically transparent approaches to, you know, what in startup world we call building in public of any organisation of this type. So, you know, everything is published online on the website. I think it is important for ARIA that it minimises its the administrative burdens on it, given its size, to the extent that is possible, given, you know, rightly the sort of scrutiny that it should be subject to. But, you know, I think to me there's a world in which ARIA was subject to FOI, but was actually way less transparent than it was today. That would actually be a less good equilibrium than the one we're in.
Right. Okay. Thanks very much for that. On public communication and accountability, and I've been very encouraged by your responses, I think, to questions from Lauren on that, and in how you responded to misinformation about some of the activities, some of the research areas. You are looking again at exciting, innovative, amazing new areas of potential technology and research impact on society, and part of your mission is to have an impact on society. Do you think you have a role to be more proactive in communicating about this potential rather than responding to misinformation?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take that. I think we've been trying to, I think that a big limitation is just bandwidth with a small team. We don't want ARIA to have where the biggest part of the team is a comms function. But with that limit in mind, I think we've tried to be very proactive. It's so essential. I mean, the communications part of ARIA is so essential. One, because again, our biggest fear in these programs is that the researcher who could change the world or be part of that solution doesn't hear about the opportunity. I think that's one, and then the other is there is, I think, a bi-directional benefit from having from having an understanding of what we're seeing at the frontiers of these technologies diffused to the public, and for us to understand the response. And we're really interested in better, effective, efficient ways for us to get an understanding of what are the public response and concerns and engagements around the programs that we're doing. And so if there are suggestions there, we'd welcome them.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm sure we will have suggestions in time. Just a specific question on funding. I mean, you possibly have seen, or spending rather, that Research Professional News noted that in 2 years, ARIA had spent, just 16.5 million on research and will have almost 600 million of its budget remaining. Is that the spending profile that you would have expected, given the long-term nature of your funding? Or should we be concerned that you're spending too little, if that's the right way to put it?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I don't think you should be concerned. The reality is, we established the agency in January 2023. There was really clear intent from both Parliament and government in terms of both the nature and the scale of the agency we should set up. And so we went and tried quickly and aggressively to stand up an organization which first and foremost could have a culture, a set of processes operationally that could balance risk-taking and accountability, but then could be built for that scale. So if you look at it, organization was set up in January. We had sort of core team and program directors in place in August, which I think was pretty fast. Those program directors, most of whom had never done a job, actually all of whom had never done a job like those, the first set of programs and opportunity spaces were all launched in that first year from August, which basically set out roughly 400 million pounds of commitments, which are now being spent in these programs, that are 3 to 5 years long, and so obviously being spent incrementally. And so the short answer is I think this is exactly as expected in terms of the timeline and scale.
I might just make one point, which I think is policy relevant on this, but maybe slightly left field, which is, I think Ilan and I, perhaps because of our backgrounds, we're very impatient around the pace that we would like to see, and I think the agency's moved incredibly fast. And when we've reflected on what has slowed us down the most, and part of the reason I'm making this point is it was also one of my reflections on the UK AI ecosystem and what holds it back. I think it's actually notice periods and gardening leave. I think, if you compare the UK to the US, one of the ways it's most different is the dynamism of the high end of the labour market. Yes. And so, one of the things I reflect on about what it would take for the UK to have bigger AI companies is it should be easier to leave existing big AI companies and start new ones. Probably the single biggest gap in the whole process of getting money out the door in ARIA is that, quite rightly, by statute, we couldn't be incorporated until we had a CFO in place. We wanted to find a brilliant CFO, and actually we found her quite quickly. But understandably, she had a notice period, a very long one. And I think there is something here about, obviously I'm not an expert at all on the broader employment question, but this is actually, I think, one of the single biggest issues for the R&D ecosystem in the UK.
That's very interesting. Thank you very much for that. And then finally, I found this session incredibly useful, and it has been really inspiring to hear ARIA set out its stall, and I think it's been particularly useful to hear both from the CEO and the chair. Now, Lord Valence, when he was the outgoing chief scientific advisor, he said that they are, by all means, if you want to pull the chair here He said, leave ARIA alone. By all means, if you want to pull the chair here, they could answer questions, but leave the CEO alone. Let him get on with it. Let him be ambitious and let him fail on some things. Now, 2 questions. Have you found it useful to be here? Do you think it's useful? Or 3 questions. Think it's useful for the CEO to come in future? But on a more serious note, how can we best support you by effectively scrutinizing you, the organization ARIA, in the future?
I guess that's a question for me. I mean, first of all, I'll say it's worth taking a moment here. I think ARIA taking root and foundationally being what I am proud of as a success. A lot of credit goes to Matt as the founding chair. It's hard for me to imagine someone who could have been better positioned to support me and the team and the board in creating an agency with that sort of boldness and accountability, but also being able to help and assist in thinking about the organizational dynamics, the entrepreneurial science, and the interface with government. So thank you, Matt. And it's funny to hear, like, yeah, you could pull him in. It's one of the roles he has played, and I'm very appreciated for it. I think, first of all, I mean, it's critical that we both respect the original governance you set out for ARIA in terms of the role of the board, et cetera, and it's critical for us to feel accountable to policymakers, Parliament, and the taxpayer ultimately. I've also really enjoyed the session. I've said earlier that the line of questioning that you had suggested might come out felt so much more, it just felt thoughtful and intentional than I might expect from a political interaction based on my background.
You were doing so well till you said that.
I know, yeah.
We'll take the compliment.
and I do appreciate it. My guess is Lord Valence, I think his comment was well-intentioned. I think one of the things that was a big fear for everyone early on is if you want to set up ARIA to be differently, make sure you don't, from policy or government, condition it the same way you do other agencies, because ultimately you may give it pressure to not be different. Honestly, I think as much as I've enjoyed this, I think the cadence, I think coming and appearing and sharing information and having this sort of dialogue is really important. Frankly, if you do it too frequently, it'll probably just be boring, because you've set us out with a mandate where really the big breakthrough innovations, I mentioned every other year we're going to recruit program directors. That's kind of the cadence of iteration in terms of our learning on adapting the agency. And frankly, for these research programs, I mean, these things will take time. And so that's probably also the cadence at which really big sort of changes in terms of we haven't talked much about the theory of change, but to get these transformations, we think very seriously about what do we need to see in the early stages. We can't predict or engineer the outcomes. What do we need to see to know that we're on track? And we think about capabilities, we think about communities of practice and changes there and talent flowing in to valuable new technology areas. And then we think about capital flows. Right now we're seeing early signs of those things. I think we have, 7 or so new startups that have emerged from our company, from our work. We have investment going into them, but the big changes in those metrics are going to come less frequently than every month or quarter. So,
yeah. Certainly we'll be very excited to come with the next CEO, maybe next year, and we'll let you know how we're getting on.
Great. Well, thank you very much. It has been a real pleasure to hear from you. I think I speak for the entire committee on thanking you for sharing your thoughts, your ambition, your inspiration, your determination to effect real change for our constituents through the long-term work of ARIA. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Order.
Thank you for the privilege and opportunity.